Gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. If I may start, dear Gabriel, first of all, I would like to congratulate you warmly for all this tremendous work which you and your colleagues have been doing over the past years in strengthening the international relations with the globe. I believe that we are living in a global village. Everyone is connected, everything is connected, so you just can't avoid to concentrate, to teach this aspect of life, of legal life as well, and you are doing it wonderfully. So, Honorable Father Vice-Chancellor, Secretary General, Honorable Dean, Honorable Ambassador, esteemed professors, administrative staff, members of the administrative staff, and most importantly, dear students. Today's ceremony is an amazing opportunity to realize that although there are different walks of life, we are all on the road. There are many stops, many destinations. There are many ways to walk the road. Some go straight towards their destinations, others are unsure of their destination. Some people just focus on themselves on the road. Others want to make it to the finish line hand in hand with others. Some say that you could and should do whatever you want to achieve your goals. Others say that it is the way you walk that matters, that the end does not justify the means. For young lawyers, there will be a variety of destinations, careers available for you. Once you have completed your legal studies at this wonderful university, you can become an attorney, a judge, a public prosecutor, defending public order, a law professor maybe, or a civil servant. You can work for a company as a legal counselor. Whatever legal path you will choose, you will have to cooperate, but also compete with others. The same holds true for your studies at the university as well. You may like, detest, or fear competition. It does not matter. It will be part of your life, part of your professional and part of your private life. It is thus crucial to pose the question and try to answer it: how shall I compete to reach my personal goal in a way that I do not destroy my competitors and at the same time serve the public interest? After graduation, you will be part of one of the best functioning market economies here in Latin America. Some will tell you competition is always vicious. It consumes you. It is just like war. It brings out the worst in us. It is inherently selfish. If you win, others will lose. It makes the strong even stronger, the weak even more vulnerable. This line of argumentation can easily lead to the conclusion that competition must be eliminated from our lives. One such philosophy, communism, denying the value of free enterprise, has luckily failed. We know by experience that this is not the right solution. At the same time, we are also aware that absolutely free markets can result in devastating consequences for the majority of the society. So there must be, I hope there is, a third road, a market economy based on virtuous competition supported by moderate and well-targeted state intervention. A historic mistake of neoliberal economic policies was the separation of economy from morality. Those who choose this path must live a dual life. In their economic life at the workplace, they fight to survive or to get wealthier, often just focusing on their self-interest. When at home, they change the faces and act sometimes as good Christians under different rules. However, in the long term, walking two paths will get us lost. It destroys our humanity. As the Bible reminds us, you cannot serve God and mammon at the same time. Therefore, the question arises, does our Christian faith and values help or hinder our participation in the legal market or in the other economic markets? Is there such a thing as virtuous competition? As a practicing lawyer dealing with legal, economic, and ethical issues of competition, I will attempt to give you now a positive answer. First, I would like to explain to you what the basic principles of Catholic social teaching tells us about rivalry, competition. Second, how competition law, my favorite academic field of law, is related to these principles. And finally, what kind of virtues of competition demands from companies and consumers in a marketplace. So in the first part, some of you may have already heard about the Catholic Church's best-kept secret, the Catholic social teaching. These texts, prepared by secular and ecclesiastical scientists, business people, experts, practicing Christians, and of course the Pope in office, provide practical guidelines, among others, on the role of competition and optimal market behavior. I have to admit that I started to take these teachings seriously rather late in my career. I urge you not to commit the same mistake. It is important to realize that Catholic social teaching is not a kind of empty dream of ecclesiastical people. Modern business management and legislation is in fact in line with most of the general principles of this teaching. For example, corporate social responsibility has become essential, especially for large multinational companies. Environmental protection and sustainable development have become part of business ethics. There is growing acceptance of the idea that managers should maximize profits in a way which also takes into account the interests of different stakeholders, such as workers, suppliers, buyers, the local community, and ultimately the interests of future generations to come. These business management ideas reflect well the principles of Catholic social teaching. As you may know, modern Catholic social teaching began with the encyclical Rerum Novarum of New Things, published in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII. Drawing inspiration from the Bible, the Church produced a set of principles by which business activity can also be judged. At the end of the 19th century, against the backdrop of the dangers of the laissez-faire capitalism and emerging communist movements, the Pope's aim was to give practical advice not only to Catholics, not only to Christians, but also to all people with good will on how to organize our social and economic life in line with Christian values. Economic freedom, the role of property, family, employment relationships, fair wages have always been on the agenda. Over time, other themes came up, such as challenges of consumerism, globalization, rapid, maybe too rapid technological development, environmental protection, and inclusive growth. For me, the key to understand Catholic social teaching is to recall the unique human anthropology of Christian faith. We find human dignity also in the economic context crucial, because we believe that human beings are imago Dei, image of God. As a famous Hungarian poet, Sándor Reményik, wrote, "God's face is buried inside me." For us, human dignity requires the exercise of our freedom within a proper ethical and social context. Free markets and fair competition are praised as emanations of such human freedom. However, Saint John Paul II, the Polish Pope, who has lived to see the collapse of communism in Central and Eastern Europe, warned in his Centesimus Annus encyclical letter, I quote, "When man is seen more as a producer or consumer of goods, than a subject who produces and consumes in order to live, then economic freedom loses its necessary relationship to the human person and ends up by alienating and oppressing he. Later, the German Pope, Benedict XVI, speaking to economists, stated that, I quote, "The economy and finance do not exist for their own sake. They are only an instrument or means. Their sole end is the human person and his or her total fulfillment in dignity." An important element of Catholic social teaching is the promotion of a kind of Christian economic lifestyle instead of a consumerist lifestyle. St. John Paul II noted, I quote, "It is not wrong to want to live better. What is wrong is a style of life which is presumed to be better when it is directed towards having rather than being, and which wants to have more, not in order to be more, but in order to spend life in enjoyment as an end in itself." In a sense, Catholic social teaching calls for a continuous change in lifestyles, especially for believers, but ultimately for all people with goodwill. Our goals on this path include sensible curtailment of our consumption, the altruistic use of our property for the common good, and supporting technical progress that promotes sustainable development and reduces the gap between the social classes. I should admit that Catholic social teaching does not praise competition and capitalism unconditionally. During history, we have indeed witnessed rather different forms of competition, some of which proved to be destructive to human dignity. Between the two world wars, Pope Pius XI recognized this dark side of unregulated competition. In his encyclicals Quadragesimo Anno, he observed with strong words, I quote, "Competition is the headstrong power and the violent energy that, to benefit people, needs to be strongly curbed and wisely ruled, but it cannot curb and rule itself." More recently, the great financial and subsequent economic crisis that started in 2008 did not increase the free market supporters in the Vatican. Pope Benedict XVI, Caritas in Veritate, calls for a market where charity also plays an organic role. Benedict explains that in a bipolar world of market corrected by state institutions, much is lost, including solidarity in relation between citizens and actions of gratuitousness. I quote, "all of which stand in contrast with giving in order to acquire," the logic of exchange, and giving through duty, the logic of public obligation imposed by state law. Benedict calls upon business managers that they should not concern themselves solely with the interests of proprietors, of owners, but must also assume responsibility for all other stakeholders who contribute to the life of the business, including the workers, the clients, the suppliers, and the community. He pleads for a market that permits the free operation in condition of equal opportunity of enterprises in pursuit of different institutional ends. Catholic social teaching values business as noble human activity. It is in a marketplace characterized by freedom of opportunities that we can develop our God-given talents. However, current Pope Francis also warns that overemphasizing and detaching individual freedoms from their social context is not in line with human anthropology. Individual rights are, of course, important, but the common good imposes limits. Pope Francis warns that it is not possible to achieve social peace on the basis of the logic of the market alone. He critiques the religion of neoliberalism, according to which the market should solve all problems. It is true that some of the wealth may be trickled down to the poor, but the growing welfare gap breaks the fabric of society. The ever larger difference between the upper 10% or maybe upper 1% and the rest of the society is a burning problem not only here in Latin America, but everywhere, globally. Companies and the state must play their part in order to achieve genuine equality of opportunities. Misinterpreted freedoms may have harmful consequences, not only on business, but also on consumers. Pope Francis points out in Laudato Si, I quote, "When people become self-centered and self-enclosed, their greed increases. The emptier a person's heart, the more he or she needs things to buy, own, and consume." The ecclesiastical teaching shows that people have moral responsibility when making consumer choices. Consumer movements and public pressure can change the behavior of companies. The Pope states that, I quote, "A change in lifestyle is what consumer movements accomplish by boycotting certain products. They prove successful in changing the way business operating, forcing them to consider the environmental footprint and their patterns of production. When social pressure affects their earnings, business clearly have to find ways to produce differently." Let's not forget, purchasing is always a moral and not simply economic act. Ladies and gentlemen, maybe these few points illustrated for us that Catholic social teaching is aware of the pressing economic and social challenges of our time and seek to provide answers, also relating to the structure of the market economy and one of its basic components, free but regulated competition. In the second part of my talk, I would like to briefly discuss how competition rules reflect some of these Catholic social teaching principles. First, competition policy aims to ensure that market players can do their best through protecting free business decisions and healthy market structures, especially from unilateral and collective actions of powerful companies. This is in harmony with the expectations of Catholic social teaching, conscious that acknowledge the importance of individual economic freedom and also the dangers of unregulated selfish market behavior. Protecting equal opportunities plays an important role in competition policy, especially in European competition policy, maybe also here in Chile. Let's just recall the huge fines imposed on the digital giant Google in Brussels for its self-preferencing strategy when the company ranked its own services on the top of Google search ads, deceiving consumers that these were the best matches for their searches, for their demand. In another EU competition law field, the control of state aid, member states are guided to support those investments which help companies operating in poorer, less wealthier regions of the Union, or smaller startup firms who face various disadvantages. The prohibition of exclusive rights granted by the state, also a part of European competition policy. That is also about, in a sense, about equality of opportunities. For example, the European Union Commission prohibited Greece from allowing a public energy company to acquire national lignite, this is brown coal, national lignite assets in a privileged manner compared to its competitors, thus benefiting from unfair competitive advantage due to cheap inputs in the electricity markets. In addition, we find a number of laws and self-regulatory standards that are motivated by moral considerations. For example, the prohibition of cartels. Pursuing selfish interests is a good example. When I say cartels, please do not think of drug cartels, but rather of secret collusions between competitors in general, which eliminate or at least restrict the risk of competition by coordinating prices and other market conditions. Cartels, which typically entail unjustified price increases, can be considered to be a form of fraud or theft, white-collar theft, from a moral point of view. Not surprisingly, in many countries, competition rules impose severe sanctions on cartel members. In many places, including Chile, cartels are also criminal offenses, punishable by imprisonment, reflecting the moral value behind the rule. It is equally easy to explore moral content in the prohibition of abuse of dominant position or abuse of monopolization. When a powerful company uses its power to exclude weaker competitors or to exploit its positions towards weaker consumers. Catholic social teaching principles on the optimal socially responsible use of the property are also reflected in competition rules, inasmuch as the owner of an essential asset, of a network, of an infrastructure, is obliged, at least under European competition rules, is obliged to share its property with its competitors even, so that consumers should benefit of more choices and better quality services in the market. Similarly, competition law goes beyond the sanctity of property, where, for example, there is a merger and acquisition between competitors, which threatens to reduce competition. Then very often, also here in Chile, the solution to the problem is that the companies have to sell one of their property. They have to divest some of their factories in order to promote the public good, the free and fair competition in the market. Let me give you a final example on how morals, market activities, and competition rules interact. In many countries, also in my country, Hungary, misleading advertising law is part of competition law. And as you know, advertising is an important tool for competition in the market. In this way, companies can distinguish themselves from other competitors. They can attract the attention of consumers to their good and even better products. However, the do not lie command also applies to advertisers. It is not surprising that in order to protect fair competition and consumer interests, many countries punish companies that want to sell their products through using misleading promises, half-truths, or even psychological aggression. So, when you will become maybe an attorney, you should never advertise yourself, promising that you can win every case before court. Ladies and gentlemen, in the final part of my speech, I would like to say a few words about the role of virtues in competition. Competition during the academic year to come, or competition in the legal profession, and competition in the marketplace more generally. Many have realized over the past decade that capitalism based on selfish efficiencies and profit motives is doomed to fail in the long run. For example, the prestigious economic organization, the OECD, also understood that we need a global economic system based on inclusive growth. Growth should be distributed equally both in societies and globally, providing opportunities not just to the wealthiest 10% of the society. Otherwise, growing problems of inequalities, migration, environmental issues may easily lead to social explosions. I believe that realizing such exciting concepts like inclusive growth, pursuing well-being instead of purely materialist desires, require open, competitive market economies based on virtuous consumers and virtuous firms. The problem here is that mainstream neoliberal economic thinking, still dominating the global economy, has been built on utilitarian ethics. In contrast, virtue ethics, as understood by, for example, Aristotle and later by St. Thomas, is based on the idea that in order to live well, to pursue happiness, we need to practice virtues. Not just in our private, but also in our professional life. It is important to underline that in virtue ethics, virtues are not simply tools to increase efficiency and profit. Taken in its widest sense, virtue means the excellence of perfection of a thing, while vice, the contrary, denotes a defect or absence of a perfection due to a thing. Moral virtues regulate man in his dealings with others and with regard to his inner passions. The Catholic Church, as you may know, lists 7 virtues, 3 theological and 4 cardinal virtues. Don't be afraid, I will not address each of these very important virtues now. Yet I'm convinced that it is difficult to operate successfully in a market in the long run without at least the 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. Also, cardinal virtues like temperance, courage, prudence, and justice are also essential building blocks of a practicing lawyer or an enterprise that creates not only growth, but also value for society and happiness for stakeholders. In the business world, virtues like moderation regarding spending, courage, and prudence regarding worthy risks, as well as justice, meaning fairness, in human relations, should play a vital role on both sides of the market, both for firms and both for us consumers. These virtues enable us, talking about consumers, enable us to consider the wider social impact of our purchase decisions. First, in order to avoid the trap of consumerism, a modern form of hedonism, we should think twice before buying, often under pressure of an advertisement, a new product, especially if it is the 2nd or 3rd car, a 5th fashion bag, only for ladies, sorry, an example from my private life, or the latest mobile phone with revolutionary battery life and other essential features. When we not only want, but really need a product, as prudent consumers, we should consider not only its value for money, which, by the way, helps increase allocative efficiency, but also the social impact of our decision. By spending my money, do I invest into a socially responsible company? Am I buying a product which will be long-lasting, thus minimizing the negative environmental impact? So we can and we should pose questions like this as consumers. As to the supply side of the market, talking about enterprises, many would question the thesis that virtuous companies could thrive in our current market systems. Instead of boring you with moral philosophical lectures, let me just tell you one concrete real-life example, proving the contrary. This is the success story of a company you might have heard of, called Veja, a manufacturer of fashionable sneakers, founded by 2 young French entrepreneurs almost 20 years ago. They managed to create a brand that mixes social projects, economic justice, and ecological materials. This firm, for example, works with South American farmer associations, that act after fair trade principles. It concludes one-year contracts with prices above the market average, pre-financing the farmers' investments. Very courageous, very, very, very nice thoughts. Its worldwide logistics are partly managed by a company that creates job opportunities for vulnerable, disabled, and socially excluded people. When they talk about the environmental impact of their products, a very fashionable topic nowadays, you might have heard of greenwashing, they are very sincere, and they also acknowledge their weaknesses if you read their websites, like their CO2 emissions, largely due to the traditional boat shipping from Brazil. Also, Vegem has managed to give more money to its suppliers of raw materials and its workers by cutting its marketing costs. As regards fair wages and gender equality, 4 out of the 5 highest earners in the company are women. Veja's success story, I could have chosen other companies as well, prove that we do not always need external state action to push companies toward the common good. Ideally, in the end, these are consumer choices that lead to sustainability. We all know that it is perhaps a bit easier to act in a virtuous manner for smaller companies, where ownership and management go hand in hand. Yet there are plenty of good examples of large multinational corporations having realized that seeking ever larger profits is not enough, but they should also proactively contribute to the common good of society. Yet we have to be realistic. Virtuous business conduct does not always come from heart, but public consumer pressure may bring it along. In addition, if it's really needed, government policies, laws, sanctions may also push companies towards implementing sustainable, inclusive growth strategies. Just to give you one example, in many countries, governments spend huge resources subsidizing telecom companies and consumers to develop the next generation of digital networks available to all members of the society. That, needless to say, contributes to a great extent to equality of chances. Dear professors, dear students, a Catholic law faculty fulfills its mission when it educates a different kind of lawyer. Lawyers who know that the end does not justify the means. Lawyers who recognize that rivalry must be fair and dignified, that neither in business, nor in legal profession, nor in our private life can you be successful and happy if you live only for your selfish goals. Lawyers who know that it is not always the broad, convenient path that leads to success. Lawyers who are conscious that Christian values do not belong behind the walls of often empty churches, but should be practiced and realized in our professional and everyday life. I know that changing selfish attitudes in markets, in legal profession, in our private life is demanding and takes much time and much sacrifice. Being different than the average can indeed be a burden. But is it so unrealistic? Are we sure that the rules of the game cannot be changed? We should realize that we are the components of the system, and we define the rules. We might need a new era of enlightenment. I hope that the years you are going to spend at this wonderful university will help you become the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Lawyers who set a good example for others. Now comes the difficult part, the final sentence. Con estos pensamientos, le deseo un significativo y feliz nuevo año académico. Muchas gracias por su atención.